Okay, a couple of announcements before we get down to the business of the evening. So, first of all, welcome to the Democratic Town Committee. Thank you all for coming. You might notice that cable TV is here. Cable has a new name. What's the new name of cable?
Big.
Big. What does BIG stand for?
Brookline Interactive Group.
Brookline Interactive Group. So, we are being filmed for cable, just so you know. They haven't started yet. You can say something embarrassing right now. I'll let you know when they start filming. So.
I'm actually filming.
I don't understand a word he says.
Okay, so first of all, I wanted to tell you that I want to thank our refreshment crew here who did an outstanding job tonight. Thank you, Julie Johnson, Shelley Crone, and Jim Franco. Thank you. Here is something very exciting that I want to share with all of you. We are having all the Democratic statewide candidates coming to Brookline. All of them. So, on May 13th, we are having all the candidates for governor coming. And we are having the candidates for treasurer and our auditor, Suzanne Bump. Then on Wednesday, May 28th, we're having all the candidates for lieutenant governor and for attorney general, and Deb Goldberg, who's a candidate for treasurer. So these are going to be two very, very exciting nights, both at the high school cafeteria. So please plan on being there. We expect a really big crowd for both of these. I also wanted to let you know that we are have a bunch of new associate members of our town committee. We have 7 new associate members that we put on tonight. And if you are not an associate member of the Democratic Town Committee and would like to do that, it's a great thing to do. You support the Democratic Party, you get involved in all kinds of interesting activities and elections. See me at the end of this. I will make sure you get an associate membership application because you want to be an associate member of the Democratic Town Committee. If you are not now, you should be. And last but not least, we're going to be joined by a few more legislators. But before we do that, there's a lot of new faces in our crowd tonight, which I am so pleased to see. So we are going to take a minute to go around and actually introduce ourselves. So, not to take too much time, but I think it would be great for people to know who's sitting in the room with them. So, why don't you just say your name and maybe your precinct, and I bet there's a lot of candidates for office in this room that I see. So, start, and you can say if you're running for whatever you're running for.
Carol Oldham, Precinct 11, town meeting member, and up for election.
A little louder, please.
Yeah, everyone has to speak up, please.
Carol Oldham, Precinct 11.
Jane Goldthwait from North Carolina, and we need to learn from Massachusetts.
This is my mom.
Keep going.
I'm Jennifer Goldsmith. I'm a Precinct 11 town meeting member and happy to be here.
Louder.
Sorry, should I say it again?
No, but
Okay.
there are people here who don't hear.
Amanda Bailey from Steve Grossman. I'm the Regional Field Director for Brookline and Greater Boston. Nice to meet you guys.
John Caron, I live in Precinct 12, where I'm also a town meeting member, and we don't have a contested race this year. Hooray.
I'm Livia Mata. I moved recently from California, and I don't remember my precinct.
We'll figure that out for you, don't worry.
All right, thank you.
Keep going.
I'm Margie Ware. I moved here from the Berkshires. I used to be on the Democratic State Committee. I'm either in 15 or 16, whatever is not in Frank's district.
Just keep going. Back there.
Joe Robinson, town meeting member, Precinct 4.
Tom Halleck, Precinct 5.
Len Palillo again from the Berkshires. My colleague here, Democratic City Committee in Pittsfield, moved here a couple of years ago. His precinct.
Yep, keep going.
Julie Johnson, I live in Precinct 9. With someone up there. Yes.
Okay, keep going. Let's go.
Where's the next?
Yes, you.
I'm Betsy DeWitt, Selectman at Large.
Even.
I'm Kevin Canavan, Precinct 10. I'm running for town meeting member in the first contested race in years in 10.
Judy Leichner, town meeting member, Precinct 16. It's not a contested race.
Nancy Fulton from Precinct 16.
Robin Kuchar, Precinct.
Peter Ames, 35-year resident of Brookline, former town meeting member, running for town meeting membership in Precinct 1.
Oh, he's a neighbor.
Josina Becker, and I'm running for town meeting in Precinct 6.
Bruce Moore, Precinct 9.
Kat Anderson, running for town meeting in Precinct 6.
Laura Schlesinger, Precinct 12.
Janet Morse Fox, and I think I'm Precinct 2, maybe.
Harris Allen, Lincoln School, Precinct? 5.
You can't stump this crowd.
Yeah, no one corrected me.
Yes.
Rich Rosen, Precinct 3.
Robert Sneerson, Precinct 1.
Betty Sneerson, Precinct 1.
Jonathan Golden, and I voted for Driscoll School, so that's
Precinct
11.
Sid Gale, Precinct 11, National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Stuart Feldman, I think Precinct 11. I'm not sure.
Where do you vote?
At Otto Shea Apartments, 61 Park Street.
Crowd.
7.
All right. This is a little precinct trivia night here. Okay. Keep going.
Josh Tyler, Precinct 9. Alex Spear, and I vote at the local school circle.
Or 12 or 13.
12 or 13.
Ooh, stumping the crowd.
On the left side.
You're at the 12.
That's good. That's progressive.
Keep going.
Evelyn Frankfurt, Precinct 9.
Jim Franco, Precinct 1.
John Bussinger, Democratic State Committee.
All right. Did we get everybody? Did we get everybody? Okay. Well, look what has happened behind me as we did all that. We have almost our complete panel. So let's get down to business here. This is our legislative roundtable. We do this once a year to make sure that everybody has a chance to meet their legislators and have a good conversation. So here's the format we're going to use this time around. We've used it before, and it seems to work well. So we're going to let these people start off with one round. They have to tell us their first priority issue. We give them 3 minutes to tell us that. Then we're going to do a second round. They get to tell us their second priority issue. And then, after that, we open up to your questions. And we usually take the questions in bulk, and then we let them to react to the questions. We tried to cover them all. Sometimes we get a second round of questions in, if the timing works right, and then we give them a couple minutes to finish up, closing statement, in case they have anything they want to say that we weren't able to get in. So we keep it lively, we keep it moving, and let's keep going. So, all right, first round. We're going to welcome you all. Representative Michael Moran. Shall we play trivia? What precincts does Michael Moran represent in Brookline? Crowd?
One.
Thank you.
I knew it.
Here we go. Representative Frank Smisek. What precincts does Representative Frank Smisek represent?
5 to 12.
3, 4, 6,
Oh, he's at large.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
No, a lot of
Thank you.
precincts.
Thank you.
Most of
Okay.
Brookline.
Next.
Right.
Next.
Cynthia Quinn.
Well, I was gonna keep going on the House here. I was gonna keep going on the House. All right, but we can go with Senator Cynthia Cream.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. Come on, crowd. All right.
Including Newton and
Wellesley.
Wellesley and
Brookline, Newton, and Wellesley.
Okay. All right. I was looking down. I almost missed you. I'm sorry. Okay, here, crowd. Name this representative. And what precincts does he represent?
14, 15, and 16.
Okay. All right. Good. You all did very well. I don't have any prizes this time. But, okay. So let's get to it. Let us start with Representative Moran. 3 minutes, one priority issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy, for running this every year. As I said, I'm Michael Moran. I have been in the House for 10 years, and closing in on 10 years at the end of this session. One of the
Stand up.
I get you. One of the issues that I am working hard on and lucky to have moved forward this session last week was the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. It's a piece that I was fortunate enough to work with a number of advocacy groups on, and it deals with essentially giving some sort of recognition to people that do domestic work, and that is nannies, house cleaners, people that work in your home. It's a little bit personal to me because my mother came here and she did that work for a number of years. I remember her bringing me along to clean houses and to babysit children. So having seen it firsthand and knowing a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations that people that do domestic work go through, when the opportunity arose for me to sponsor this legislation, I was more than happy to do that. And I was very fortunate, along with the support of my colleagues in the House, to have that put in last week's bill that we passed on minimum wage. It's part of that bill. So essentially what it does, it just provides with domestic workers with some recognition that they are an integral part of our work and our work environment, and that it gives them some protections when it comes to their workplace and workplace safety.
Yeah.
I'm Frank Smizik, and since I'm the chair of the Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change, that's where my priorities have been in the last couple of sessions. It's a little frustrating. I think even the legislature does not see the very danger that we're facing from climate change. Or most of the people that we talk to say, oh yeah, climate change is a big issue. But it's about 7th on most people's lists. And I think people are concerned about their work, their health, very important things. But quite honestly, climate change has a lot to do with all of those things. So I think that I'm continuing to fight as hard as I can to get our legislature and the people work with the legislature to make this a bigger priority. The one thing I found, and I spoke to the high school group yesterday, 2 days ago, and the children there must have been 60 children in the high school who were really excited about trying to address the issue of climate change. There are people, they're mostly younger, because it's going to be impacting them even more. So in 2008, we came up with lots of really good laws, and right now we're in the process of trying to make those laws apply to addressing the carbon situation in this state and the country. And we're making some progress. We're running a little behind. I think we're running behind because it's very hard to get to decide. There's so many options. It's really hard to decide. What we've done in the legislature is say, agency, you're the ones who are responsible for this. Come up with plans. And what you have to do is make sure that by the year 2020, our emissions are below 20% of the 1990 emissions. And that's the goal from the statute. And there are some issues that I think we're going to have trouble meeting. And that's one of them, that goal. In fact, the governor has come out with a plan to take energy from Quebec. It's hydro, which is done through water and creates energy. And in doing that, it'll stop us or save us from doing a lot of things here locally to do smaller excuse me, smaller efforts. So I'm right now against that. I don't think it's good to rely on Quebec, which is a long way away, and we're going to have to get lines that come out through here through the Northern Passage in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire doesn't want it. So it's going to take some time, and I think we don't have the time, and we have to start with using smaller, more effective ways of getting renewable and clean energy. And let me just one more minute here. One of the ways is doing it is through solar, and solar is really growing immensely in Massachusetts. There are problems, of course, if you don't have a tree blocking your way in the house in your house. You can get good solar, and it's really becomes cheap, and you can get, if you get enough energy, you can sell it back to the agencies. So it's a good thing. Wind has been very hard. We have Cape Wind coming up. That's going to happen now. We can do anaerobic digestion, which is using food and other waste and making it clean energy. And we can use our own hydro here, smaller hydro. So that's really been what I put all my energy in, is trying to get us to do more locally.
Okay, let's keep going with the House. Representative Coppinger.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Ed Coppinger. I'm the junior representative here. I'm in my 4th year. Majority of my district is West Roxbury and Rosendale, and I have precincts 14, 15, and 16 in Brookline. My biggest issue isn't necessarily a House issue. If you want to go back to your trivia game, who can guess what my #1 issue is in South Brookline right now that I've been dealing with the neighbors on?
It is a House issue.
It is a House issue. It's a many houses issue. It's the development in Hancock Village. We had a small little meeting last night with some of the neighbors, and it's myself and the neighbors included. We're all in favor of affordable housing, but we're in favor of the right type of affordable housing, the right placement of affordable housing, the right use of the law, of the 40B law, that people can't use it in an abusive manner, which it seems is being done on the parcel of land right now. And this has really consumed me. When I first ran in 2010, my predecessor Mike Rush said the biggest issue you're going to have in South Brookline is Hancock Village. And as I've said often, here we are 4 years later. It's still my biggest issue. And as we are breaking apart the process of the 40B and how the mass development, the quasi-agency, gave the approval, the temporary or the preliminary approval to Chestnut Hill Realty, it just seems like the process is broken, and that we as a legislature need to revisit the guidelines and the steps taken in how the process is done, and have it be in an open and fair way, and that guidelines are followed. It seems like the guidelines were a little bit willy-nilly. It seems like things happen behind closed doors without open policies, without anybody able to take a look at it. So that's really 100% my biggest issue on both sides of the district right now, West Roxbury, Boston side, and Brookline side, is the whole process of the 40B, how the preliminary approval came. We've met with Mass Development. I've met with Chestnut Hill Realty. I've met many times with the neighbors, and we're still trying to just grasp our hands around it. I mean, it's going to be a huge burden on the town of Brookline. There's already talk about one school needs to be built, and if this goes forward, could be a second school needs to be built, which is going to be on the backs of every one of the residents, not just the people in my district of South Brookline.
Senator Green, your priority issue to start with.
Thank you, Cindy, and I appreciate very much that you didn't ask us to repeat back everyone's name in their precinct because I was trying and I got 2 or 3, and then I was going, oh my God, I'm flunking. So I have had several priorities. I'm chairing a new committee this year, but a priority that I've had that I felt good about, seeing that it was passed in the Senate anyway and expect something is coming from the House, is the domestic violence legislation. So I had for several years legislation on employment leave for victims of domestic violence, saying that if you were a family member, were a victim, or a family member was a victim, you could take up to 15 days of paid or unpaid leave if you had to go to court, if you had to go to the doctors. Frankly, it's hard enough to stand up to an abuser, but when you have to worry about either where you live or where you work and you lose your job, the situation becomes untenable and you go back to the abuser. We passed through a legislation I had, a domestic abuse legislation with regard to employment, with regard to other parts, but this was the employment part. The first part we passed was with regard to housing, that a victim of domestic abuse could leave their property, break their lease if they really could prove they were a victim. So if you worry about your housing, you worry about your work, you will go back to your abuser. So I was very happy that through my bill, the Senate passed several months ago this bill on domestic violence. As part of that bill, we also did something called, there's something called accord and satisfaction. So in a criminal matter where there's a barroom fight, it's not uncommon that the people who've been in that fight, when there's criminal actions to be taken, someone comes back and says, I don't want to prosecute this, I don't want to go forward because the person that, one of the people in the fight broke his nose or broke her nose, paid medical expenses. That's called accord and satisfaction. I got my accord, I'm satisfied, I don't want to go forward. That had been applied in the area of domestic violence. Certainly, that would not be the right place to do that, because in the area of domestic violence, we have to be concerned that somebody stand up for themselves. And you don't want to have a situation where somebody paid them, because money, domestic violence have a link. So there were other provisions of a new law on strangulation and suffocation, all of which I was very, very pleased came through the Senate as a result of a bill I had been working on for years. And my hope is that when this term is over by July, we will have resolved whatever differences we may have with the House, and that we can look back and say we passed a domestic violence bill.
All right, let's do one more round of priorities, and then we will get to all of your questions. So let's go back in the same order. Representative Moran.
My very first chairmanship was I was the chairman of election laws, and I did that for 2 terms, so just shy of 2 terms. And elections has always been something I've been interested in from even before I was elected to office. So when I was offered the chairmanship of election laws, it was something kind of fit naturally with what I was interested in. While I was the chair of election laws, we were fortunate last session to pass a bill that dealt with a number of reforms in our elections. Auditing of machines, pre-registration for kids 16 and 17 years old, and a few other things administratively with clerks and checkout tables and things of that nature. Unfortunately, the bill didn't make it through the whole process, but this year again, we went at it this session, and we passed a second election bill in the House, which dealt with early voting and a number of other issues. So that bill has been taken up in the Senate as well, and currently sits in a conference committee where I have been fortunate to be named one of the conferees on the committee, and it's currently in conference. It's an exciting bill for me simply because I've been at it for so long. A couple of sessions, chairman of the committee. I was also chairman of the redistricting committee in the House, Joint Committee on Redistricting. So the elections issue is one that I'm familiar with, one that I think we need some reforms in. and one that I think, in the end of the day, by the end of this session, we are going to get something that is going to move the ball forward, unlike something we haven't done. And probably, I think the last major election reform we did was motor voter, and that might be approaching 20 years ago. So we haven't done anything in the area of election reform in probably close to 20 years, approximately. So I know somebody in this room will correct me if I'm wrong on that. But suffice to say, around about there. And these are some good things we're doing. The bill that is going to come out of conference is going to be better than the advocates had hoped. So I'm excited about that. So that's something that we're working on right now currently. We've had a couple of conference committee meetings. We're not far off, I don't believe, but only time will tell. But I'm cautiously optimistic that something is going to be come out of conference and be signed into law by the end of this session.
Representative Smizek.
Okay, I'm not going to stick with one, I'm sorry, but I'll use the same amount of time. First, charter schools. We've seen some communities that tried to stop charter schools from coming in, and they weren't able to stop it because there's a panel that decides that. And I have a bill that would require the local people who would make that decision, like the schools and the government, or a vote. And the bill did not get through the session. It was not put out for debate, and so this year it's not gonna happen. I think we have to get a little bit more support to do that. The second thing is legal aid. And for all my life, my legal life, I worked in legal aid, and right now it's being cut and cut and cut. And when I was there were a lot more people, but we still didn't have enough people to help the people who were eligible. For instance, Mass Legal Assistance Corporation has suffered a 78% decline in its largest funding source, which is IOLTA, which is a mistake because the money is what's the word? The money for interest is no longer. There's no more interest given in these things, so that's where they used to get the money. Legal aid programs have lost 77 of the 212 positions in Massachusetts, so it's really killing the program, and that's really sad. This one might be a little more controversial. Metco. I know there's some talk about Brookline leaving not doing having the Metco students come here, but it would be a very, very, very sad thing to do because, quite honestly, the Metco students are doing better in tests than just overall in the tests by going to these schools than those schools themselves and other schools that where the students left. So they're doing very well. Students are. I'm not a big fan of MCAS, but every one of the students in Metco passed, and it's a good program that's helping kids who are low income, who come from areas where education is not being pushed, and that's I just cannot see that program being cut back. In Brookline, it's good for the students to have diversity, and it's good for both the students who come and the students who stay here. And one last thing, if I have time, is medical marijuana. I was probably the leader in the House working on that issue. Let me just give you a quick story. My daughter's father-in-law was dying, and he had cancer, and his son was getting married in a few months to my daughter, and he's in California, which is a medical marijuana state. he took the radiation and did all the tests, and he got really sick. He couldn't eat. He had no energy, so he smoked marijuana. And this is really what this medical marijuana is for these people. And he was able to come to the wedding. He danced, he sang, he told jokes. He saw his son get married to someone he really loved, and he was satisfied. He loved it. It was something that he knew he didn't know he could do because of what his sickness was. He died 3 months later, but at least there was something there that could help him, and it wasn't something like OxyContin or Vicodin. I just made the two. And those are more dangerous than marijuana, and they don't work. So those are the things I've worked on this year.
Representative Coppinger, would you like to break the rules also?
I'll break the rules. Since the budget season is upon us, I'll just talk quickly about two of my budget priorities. And since I was elected in 2011, it seems like the economy wasn't so good. In the first place they slash is seniors and children, and things that we fought collectively as a delegation to try to keep from happening. The first issue is natural occurring retirement communities, something that myself and Rep. Smizek work on together. Here's a natural occurring retirement community in Brookline, and they designated a lot of West Roxbury as one too.
What does that mean?
What that means is, I think the designation first started in New York City for high-rise buildings of Jewish communities that over time people decided to stay in the buildings rather than going to nursing homes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So they naturally occurred and became sort of a retirement community. In West Roxbury, it doesn't happen up and down because it's mostly single-family homes. It happens broader. And what we're able to do in West Roxbury with this fund, so there's a group of 6 or 9 organizations that we fight for to try to get this funding in the budget. They split up the money evenly. I think it's 6. They each get about 15, 16% of the money. And in West Roxbury, what they do is they allow seniors to age in home rather than having to go to a nursing home. And they're able to bring services to them in their home. And I know in Brookline, they do Tai Chi programs and things like that for some of Frank's constituents. So that's something he and I work on together. And then the other thing is a priority for me is a reading recovery program, which is, I first started in the Boston Public Schools. It's try to get those kids in first grade who have trouble reading and to make sure by, I think it's the end of 2nd grade, that they're able to be up to the point where they should be. I have 3 daughters in Boston Public Schools. My 5th grader was diagnosed, the 6th grader now was diagnosed in the 4th grade with a learning disability. If she had reading recovery in the school, we would have caught it that much earlier. And that's a program that's been slashed 50, 60% statewide. And I think it's very important because if you're not going to pay for them now, you're going to end up paying for them later. So those are 2 of my biggest issues.
Okay, Senator Green.
I can or I can't break the rules?
Break the rules, but try to keep in the
Break
times.
the
Break the rules if you keep in the time period.
Okay, I'll try and do that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is something that I've been working all term on and haven't seen it come out of committee. It's an act relative to firearms and firearm violence. So what I filed early on was the gun bill. It's the lead bill in the Senate. I know that we have the toughest gun laws in the country, but it doesn't deal with the things we ought to be dealing. So just a few of the important things. My hope is that something will come out from it. So presently, the chief of police, and particularly in all of my districts, the chief of police have come forward to me. If you come before the chiefs and you want a gun, they have some discretion to issue it or not. If they can find there's a reason not to issue it, that class permit they can control. But if you come to them with an FID request that is for a rifle, the law says they shall issue it. So there is a strange thing here when it comes, so that when they deny the guns, somebody says, forget it. I can get a rifle, I don't need the guns. That's one issue. The other issue would be there's a bunch of them, I'll try and be brief. Increasing the penalties in enforcement for gun possession with an expired license. That's relevant for Brookline. The police found some person who they suspected had certain problems, who had expired gun, who had a cache of expired guns. But they couldn't go into the house because it wasn't a penalty. There was no penalty attached to having an expired license and guns in possession for which the license had expired. My bill would make that a fine so that we would aid police in their ability to go into a home in the event that they found guns. Lots of guns are sold. There's this one gun a month bill that I filed over and over and over again. And so I'll tell my just one quick story about the guns, since we all keep talking about our families here. I filed a one gun a month bill when I first got elected, and that would be, really was filed so that we could stop the wholesaling of guns to kids. So you'd come in, kids could easily get guns, and they were purchased and brought from either other states or purchased in Massachusetts. And I thought that I would preclude people, unless they were dealers, from purchasing more than one gun a month. Went to file the bill, I turned to my husband and I said, this is my new bill, and he went, oh my God, that is so embarrassing. I said, why? Why are you telling people to buy one gun a month? Why do they even need 12 guns? I think you'll be embarrassed, they'll laugh at you. No one laughed at me, no one passed the bill. The next month, as a newly elected official, I saw a magazine go on the desk, came across my desk, a pamphlet, and I saw my picture on the front, and I said, wow, you know, I just got elected, and it was from GOAL, Gun Owners of America. And over my picture, it said the worst legislator in Massachusetts. So I did not get my picture with full credit, but it was something that I have filed. The governor is now filing. I hope that we pass a bill that deals with that. There are many other facets about background checks and sales of guns at shows. I don't know if everything will happen. My hope is something happens. I think I've stood with the parents of Newtown. I've gone to meetings and spoken. My hope is that we will rise to the occasion and do something. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, thank you for letting me break the rules, is to an act to regulate the use of automatic license plate readers. So we have their ALPRs, are devices that are used by law enforcement, follow people, know what they're doing, tracking them. I have no problem with doing that, but we have no guidelines as to how long the data is used, why the data is used, how the data is used. So I have a bill, the bill was heard, I went and testified, which would limit the use of the ALPRs to certain law enforcement purposes and establish some parameters for the storage and use of the data. My hope is that that might happen. I've been told by committee chairs that they agree with that, but again, it's all a hope, and we'll know by the end of the term. I could go on and on, but I won't.
All right, well, we'll give you more chances to go on. We're going to move into the next phase of our roundtable here. One thing I am going to do is circulate our attendance sheet, because I want to make sure everybody here is on our list to get our town committee notices, so please keep that moving around the room. Okay, so now we get into the part where you get to ask questions, and what we do here to try to get everybody's questions in is we're going to take a whole bunch of questions, we're going to write up the topics here, and then we're going to ask our legislators to try to address as many of the issues as we can, and then if we have time, we're going to do a second round of questions. So we're going to try to reach everybody's questions before the end of the night, all the topics we can. So I'm going to start, I'll start at that end of the room. I'm going to ask you for your questions, if you can be brief, so that we can get in as many as we can. Yes, Sid, go for it.
Department of Mental Health has been seriously affected by the cuts starting with 2009 and continuing through the present time, and the governor has continued to minimize the funds that are going. There are many people who are going to lose their services because of that.
Okay, DMH cuts. Next question.
Yes, it's about a marijuana dispensary, since I know that 1416 Beacon Street has been slated as a possible site. I'd love some commentary on the process going forward on that, and should it be approved, what the oversight will look like at the state level.
Okay, marijuana dispensaries. Yes.
So you might have seen the chart in the Times the other day that shows that Massachusetts has one of the worst income distributions in the country at the state level. But either way, even if it didn't, the question is, what can we start to do at the state level to address the issue of income inequality? I mean, I know you can raise the minimum wage, but at the levels we're talking about, that won't do anything. So, what would you suggest in terms of more serious legislation?
Okay, income inequality, the state level. Yes, in the back. Yes, you.
As a medical doctor myself, congratulations to the second gentleman that spoke about marijuana. Excellent points. To the senator, about guns, very much against to the point of having a gun ever. How can we improve here and also make this nationwide? How can you, because I can clearly see you can lead something very special here. How can we use your knowledge and make this go, to other states? And maybe you could send me for senators in Washington.
Okay, good. Question on guns. Yes, let's take two more and then we'll let them respond, then we'll do another round. We'll take a couple more. All right. Yes.
Do any of you see future healthcare reforms, including a single-payer option in Massachusetts, much as Vermont has done?
Okay, healthcare reform, single payer. Yes, okay, I'm gonna take these four and then we're gonna let them respond. Okay, let me go all the way in back first. Tom.
How can we help you? Where would grassroots pressure be most helpful in achieving some of your priorities? And Frank, I'm particularly interested in hearing about that in terms of climate change.
Okay, Len.
Yeah, given the, well, not so recent, 3 years ago, whatever it was, the Citizens United and now the McCutcheon decision, what kinds of things, I heard you talk about election laws, what kinds of things are you or the legislature planning to try to combat the ridiculous thing with those two pieces?
Okay, and there was one more I'll take and then we'll keep going. Judy.
Yeah, I guess in a way it's following up on good and open government, and I would like, Representative Coppinger spoke about what happened at the Hancock Village issue with a denial followed by an approval with no explanation as to how they went from one to the other, and we're quite curious as to how this happened. We'd like to have the help of all of our legislators, because this affects everybody in Brookline as well as everybody in the state, to look into this and make sure that this process is an open and transparent one that cannot be manipulated by anybody else.
Okay, so here you have the topics that are on the mind of some of your Brookline voters, and we're going to give you 3 minutes to go through and react to some of these topics. So let's get to it. Shall we start backwards this time? Let's start backwards. Representative Coppinger.
I don't even know where to begin, to be honest with you. I wish Rep. Sanchez was here to talk about the health coverage, because he actually had a good conversation at the when the League of Women's Voters was in, talking about the single payer probably isn't going to happen for any time soon because of the way that the legislature decided to tackle healthcare and make sure everybody got coverage first, and then they're trying to deal with the financial reforms there. But he can speak to it 100 times better, I think. I know that I can, and I think that others as well. But the Hancock Village piece is something that I think I need to speak with the other representatives here after the meeting, and with Chairman Kevin Honan, who's the Housing Committee, because as she stated, that there was a denial letter issued. Hancock Village mysteriously withdrew their application, not knowing supposedly that a denial letter was coming. Didn't address any issues on the denial letter, resubmitted their plans, and got a blanket approval with no conditions.
It smells.
It smells. And that from dealing with the neighbors and FOIA and the Freedom of Information and everything else, that the quasi-agencies that have the ability to designate parcel as a 40B opportunity, which will bypass local zoning codes, which kind of can allow a property owner to almost do whatever they want with the property if they say it's going to be affordable. But what does affordable really mean? And the decisions aren't being made at the upper echelon of those quasi-agencies. It's being made very low down the pole in who's getting to those people. Because it does seem like, as you said, it seems kind of suspicious. So that's something I definitely need to talk to the delegation about, because it is going to affect the whole town.
Senator Cream?
Well, I think I probably should respond to the person who asked about the guns information. There are a lot of groups, activist groups, that have gotten together to be supportive for proposals for gun legislation. I'm having trouble in Massachusetts, so I don't have any clout in the federal government unless you can get me elevated to Congress quickly, and that's fine, but I don't know if you can do that. But I gather that they're having a harder time at the federal level. My hope is that those groups will get together and make some noise, and that this will happen. It's kind of died down. So I think that whatever you can do or anyone can do with friends and people in other areas, the problem is that I'm very, very fortunate. Newton, Brookline, and Wellesley are wonderful communities, all very social conscious, and I feel good, and that's why they elect me. But then I talk to my other colleagues who live in other areas where there are gun clubs and where there are people who claim that we have no right to tell them to do anything. And so we have to balance all of those interests. That's why I thought we're not going to do it all, but a few things that we seem to feel we can't go all one way, we ought to be able to do something. So appreciate any help from many different kinds of groups. And in response to the environmental question, I have signed on as a sponsor of the divestment of fossil fuels. I know that will be coming to town meeting, and I'm probably the only time I've taken a position before town meeting has taken that position and come to it with me. But I feel so strongly, as Frank has said, the need to be serious about renewable energy, that I have signed on as a sponsor of that bill. Newton is now hopefully going to pass a bill banning plastic bags. I will say I was very interested. I don't know how it happened, but anticipation for the Passover holiday, I was shopping across the street at the butchery, my husband and I, and they packaged my things in a plastic bag. And I said to a woman who was so hard, not speaking as well as she could have, I want paper. And she told me they got an exemption for the holidays. And I'm not stooling on the butchery, but I was like, really? How do you do that? And then that ended the discussion. And I left with my plastic bags with matzah. But on the other hand, I had company in my home for brunch several weeks ago, and I went to finagle a bagel on Route 9. I bought bagels, and I said, do you have the plastic bags to keep them fresh? And they said, oh, we don't have plastic bags. I said, oh, I thought you were in Newton. So I'm hoping that the plastic bags, fossil fuel, that we'll all be helping Frank in the hard work that he's doing to make people realize the environment. And I have some bills particularly in line with things that Frank is talking about. It's something called Dark Sky, which we're really hopeful might come out of committee, which would say that on state highways you need to put lights that shine down, not shine up, hoping that we'll still be able to look at the stars that we haven't been able to see. I think that's it for some of the.
Okay, Representative Smizek, any of these topics you want to conquer here?
Sure. I'll talk about the marijuana one because I had two questions on that one. First, let me say that the newspapers really got out of hand on this one. It was very early in the process. They selected 20 companies to do it, but apparently one of those companies had somebody who had done something wrong, and then it was found out. He was put off the committee, out of the application, right? So that was only stage 2, and there's 4 more stages. And The next stage starts in the spring. And the DPH will, when they find out what the places are that they're looking at, they'll come in and make an initial inspection. They'll look to see whether the place is grow ready and whether it's safe and whether it's protected. They will continue to do processing during this time. They will then determine whether it's retail ready. And once all inspections are complete, including the checks for compliance, then they will give a final certificate of registration. And only those applicants who have a final certificate will be allowed to open. And then once they open, they'll have continuous oversight. Now, there's not much more you can do than that, but I believe that DPH has done a very good job. I mean, no one's talked about the casinos and all the problems they had, but when it's medical marijuana, they just found one little thing and they went kazoo on it. And so I think the medical marijuana, one other thing that's important there is they're going to be growing it in that place, and they're not going to be growing it outside or other fields they might determine. And what's going to happen is people are going to get served. They'll be taken from there, and there are many, many different kinds of marijuana for many, many different kinds of people. And they will do certain things, some of which are even to take away the high you get from it. Then people will have somebody deliver it to their house. And there'll be people, they're not going to allow the people to grow on their own lawns. So it's a very tight system, and I really hope it works, because there are a lot of people in the last parts of their lives need something to make them feel a little bit comfortable. And there's nothing wrong with that. Marijuana, quite honestly, hasn't killed anybody, ever. Was there another question I should have?
Can I be more specific about the marijuana question with Precinct 11? So I've been to a bunch of the meetings now, and there's nobody who's been in a meeting who hasn't said that there's efficacy to medical marijuana. That's not the debate. But I think very vocally in Precinct 11, what we learned from New England Treatment, NETA, I think it's called, is that really they had a very hard time finding any landlord who wanted them. So the geography they got isn't optimal. It's heavily trafficked corner, very residential, right near a park. And in Precinct 11, there's a lot of concern about that geography, not about the efficacy. Nobody is saying that people suffering at end of life, suffering middle of life shouldn't have this, but it's a question of where. And I guess that's, I think, probably what we're looking to address. They were very forthright that they pounded the pavement, no one wanted them. This was the one location that didn't hit the school zones, that they didn't, they had set some boundaries even greater than the state had set for themselves. So I think that we want to kind of bring you into that conversation.
Well, you can't force people to like having a marijuana store in their neighborhood, or you can't force a landlord to have one. There's still a bad attitude toward marijuana, and what's going to happen here is there's not going to be many people coming. They're going to be delivered.
I'm sorry, we're gonna have to move on. So if you could let Representative Smisek just finish the question.
That they gave, so it's are there a lot of people? They said 3,600 visits a month at the corner of Summit and Beacon.
That's way
I mean,
high.
in their DPH app.
Okay, we're gonna have to move on now. Representative Moran, any of these questions you want to handle?
I'll try and do some rapid fire back at you. DMH, I think you're going to see in the House version of the gun bill some talk about DMH as it relates to people with guns and funding and getting them the appropriate services. That's a national discussion you hear about. We haven't talked much about it in our debate on guns, but I think you're going to see some discussion with regard to mental health and money going towards mental health to service some of the issues surrounding gun violence. So that's, let me just rapid fire and you can grab me after I finish, all right?
There was one other issue regarding that, and that was they were going to have police officers in the schools, and those police officers should be trained on how to recognize and to deal with kids who have a mental illness.
To my knowledge, we haven't talked about police officers in the schools in Massachusetts. I think that was a Sandy Hook or a national goal type of thing that they said. I forget who it was.
That's what the NRA said.
Yeah, we haven't,
I
we
don't
haven't,
think
yeah,
we
we
don't
haven't,
have that.
no, we haven't talked about that
I
here.
thought the committee had brought that issue up.
I can tell you if they did, it's not in the discussion right now.
Shouldn't there be more money towards mental health programs to help people out instead of like having police officers, what he says?
So we, that's the issue we're gonna address, right?
Well, that's, what I'm saying is that a portion of the mental health issue is going to be discussed on the House side when dealing with the cuts that mental health has received. But it's going to be as it relates towards gun violence. That's the vehicle, but it's still the issue you're talking about. Medical marijuana, I think it's a local issue. I think towns should decide. Income distribution wasn't a huge step, but we did do an increase in the minimum wage. I think you're gonna see that happen in the state. Since I've been in this House, for 8 of the 10 years that I've been there, Massachusetts has been amongst the highest as far as minimum wage goes. But, you know, that's, as many of these issues, including mental health, it's a much bigger discussion. There's, you know, funding for higher education, there's, you know, job worker training, it's a much bigger issue than just minimum wage. So I don't pretend to say that that's the fix of everything, because it's not. But we need to also, you know, direct funding, and we have. We had $11 million in our welfare reform bill we did that is geared towards getting people off welfare and into a job and get them job training. So we have done something there, not enough. I don't think we can ever do enough when it comes to that issue, quite frankly. And I don't think we have enough dollars ever to really kind of combat that issue. But where we have opportunities, we should try and do something. Guns, never shot one, never owned one, never want to. Healthcare reform, single payer. I have voted in a con and will continue to vote for single payer, but as Eddie spoke, I don't see that as being something that's likely to happen, especially since the success when compared to the country, the successes we've had with getting our numbers up to 98% of the people covered, and some of the successes we've had with our system that we've chose to go down. I'm hopeful that maybe someday we get there. I'm supportive of single payer, but to be honest, to answer your question honestly, I don't see that as being something in the immediate future. Grassroots help. Find some subjects that you care about. Connect with advocacy groups and convince, as Senator Cream said, you know, we're sort of talking in a vacuum in this room, I think, in a lot of these issues. When you get up towards the border of Tingsboro and Drake-it and areas like that, it's a much different room, and there are much different discussions. So it's not about winning the hearts and minds in Brookline and Newton and Austin Brighton and Wellesley and places like that. It's about winning the hearts and minds in some of the communities that are a lot more difficult to persuade. Campaign finance reform. That's similar to income distribution. There's so many opinions on what we need to do. And a lot of them run counter to our beliefs. You know, we think putting caps is a good idea. Well, if you look at what caps have done, maybe it wasn't the desired outcome. Some people say 100% disclosure. I don't know the answer. I just know it's a long discussion, and there are a lot of good ideas. Some of the ideas that we put into place have worked. Some of them have, I believe, and this is my opinion, have had a reverse effect. So it's a tough issue. I do think we need to get at the third-party expenditures, you know, not being able to tell us who's given money, and finding out, you know, 3 or 4 days before the election who gave the $4 million to the person who won the election. But again, it's a much longer discussion. There is a bill right now Jamie Eldridge has filed, which actually has, I believe, some merit to it. So,
What's in that? Just briefly, real
It's about disclosure and getting after the who gives the money and how much they give and when they give it. Hancock Village, that's the only one I have nothing to say on because I don't know anything about it.
Well, okay, we covered a lot of ground there. Let's do one more round of taking your questions, and I think given the time that this will probably be our last round. So if our legislators have things to add that we haven't touched on, this will be their time to add them. Let me just say one more thing before I let them go on their last round. I just wanted to repeat that our next big events coming up are with our statewide candidates. May 13th, we'll have all the governor candidates here. May 28th, we'll have all the lieutenant governor candidates and the attorney general candidates. And somebody whispered to me that I neglected to introduce myself after I asked all of you to introduce yourselves. So I'm Cindy Rowe. I'm chair of the Democratic Town Committee here in Brookline. And my last plug, if you're not an associate member of the Democratic Town Committee and would like to be, I would be happy to send you an application. So with that, let's take our last round of questions. Let's start all the way in the back.
So I have an interest in food policy and food issues, and I'd like you to speak about, I guess, the current, I'm not sure where it sits, on GMO, labeling. I know it was out of committee, but I don't know where it is, and how involved are you in this issue?
Okay, food and GMO labeling. Yes.
I'm concerned about the infrastructure, primarily, for instance, the natural gas lines. Having lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and having had a gas line explode and cause great destruction. And so I'm concerned, and I see piecemeal things being done by MSTAR in the town of Brookline. And I'm wondering if there is any legislation.
Okay, gas line issues. Yep, coming around this way. Yes.
I'm just curious as to what percentage of houses in all your town, Brookline is a little one. I mean, I know you don't represent all of Brookline, but have solar.
Okay, solar. Yes. Next question.
Taxation. It seems to me that the income redistribution would be very much helped by two things: progressive taxation and more taxation, so that we can pay for things like higher education, reduce the cost of higher education, early education, which will only help. So how is it? I know there wasn't an appetite for that the last couple of years. And what do you think about the appetite for the future?
Okay. Yes.
Never.
Yes, you.
Just an update on the status of the Health Connector computer system.
Okay. And I think I see the final question there. Yes.
There is funding that was removed from aid to providing income for people who have lost their job and are about to be evicted, and funding was increased for shelters instead of, and to getting people out of motels and paying the rent, which would be a lot cheaper than keeping them in motels and the like.
Great. Okay. Well, another great round of questions, and this is going to be our last round. So do what you can, and if there's anything you want to add, this is your chance. Representative Moran.
Alrighty. GMO, one of the bills that was filed, I sponsored on GMO labeling. We got something out of committee. The bills were in two committees, Public Health and Natural Resources and the Environment. The chairman of Public Health is Jeff Sanchez. He's not here tonight, but he's a colleague of ours. Jeff, in consultation with the Senate chair and the House chair on both committees, sent the bills over to Natural Resources and the Environment, and I believe they have put a bill out of the committee on GMOs. So that's the first time we've gotten a bill out of committee with a favorable attachment to regarding GMOs. So that's what that. Infrastructure gas lines. I wasn't quite sure if you were talking about a federal issue or come from Canada, or if this is something locally. I can just locally dealing with This issue is very difficult for me. We had a situation up in Cleveland Circle, which, you know, abuts Brookline very closely, on a gas line that was put in on parklands. I find it very challenging to deal with National Grid. That was the company who was putting in the gas line up there. And I share your frustrations. I would love to speak with you if you have any ideas on how we can better at least have a more transparent process. At least have a more transparent process when it comes to those things, because a lot of the residents around there never had a say on it, never had any idea it was happening. Next thing you know, they're putting a gas line right through a state piece of parkland. So, solar, I don't know the percentages. I can tell you it's getting better, because I know in my neighborhood, directly, like literally within a stone's throw of my house, there are 2 houses that now have solar. So I think with some of the tax incentives that we did,
we have solar and we love it.
yeah, well, I know that I'm talking to one of my neighbors that virtually, I think he pays something like 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and everyone else pays 14
We don't
or
pay any.
something.
Yeah.
And the installation actually, when written off on his taxes, ends up costing him anything. So, to answer your question, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know we're getting better.
It's growing, yeah.
Taxation, Julie, I love you, but in my time in the House, we've done 3 tax votes, so I'm not saying it's not enough, and it's never enough, but we have had tax votes, and they're very tough votes. I had an old timer who had served in the House for years when we were going through gay marriage in that vote, which was an easy vote for a lot of us. And the people that were having problems with that vote said, "You think this is tough? Wait till you have your first tax vote." So I don't find a hard time voting for taxes, but I will say again, back to what Senator Cream was saying, it is a different state, and once you get out of certain areas, there are far different opinions on that. So, and you do have to get it through 2 branches of the legislature and signed by the governor. So, Health Connector. Punt. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't have a Facebook account. I don't, you know, so, what's the last one?
Shelter funding, home base.
This issue I'm very familiar with. I have 2 hotels in my district that house homeless people. We were on path before this economic downturn to get them all out of hotels. I know it's something that both the Senate and the House have their eye on and want to do as soon as possible, for a lot of very practical reasons. That it's just we're subsidizing hotel owners. 1, it's cheaper if we house them. 2, but you know, and unfortunately, as I think everybody up here and a lot of you have talked about, you know, it's been tough to find money for anything. We're coming out of that now, quite frankly. And we just talked about that at our last leadership meeting, about how we're going to get on the right track to getting everybody out of hotels and getting them in to
increase the amount of shelters.
What's that?
And kept the amount for funding.
Well, there's that way of doing it, but there's also, we have units that are empty, right? Because to bring them up to speed, and I'm sure, Frank, you know this issue very well, to bring them up to speed costs X amount of dollars, and rather than put the money into bringing them up to code and moving, we have the actual space for them. We just have to put enough money into that to bring them up to code to move them into. All I'm saying is that it's something we've talked about numerous times. We were on track to do that, to get everybody out of hotels. Unfortunately, we had a little bump in the economy, but it is right now, I know, on a lot of the minds of us in the House and the Senate to get us to the point where no one is living in hotels.
Okay, Representative Smysen.
The first one, GMOs. About 10 years ago, I filed a bill that would not allow GMOs. As you can see, it didn't go anywhere. And we're getting more and more. In fact, I read a magazine article yesterday that there's a whole bunch coming out right now, GMOs, and it's really becoming an issue, more of an issue than it ever was. I supported bills like Mike's, and we'll just have to see, we'll just have to press and make people more educated about it. That's really why people don't even know what GMOs are. So,
So do you advise, because we support it, do we contact all our friends across the state? And what do we, do we identify who may be on the fence about this?
It's in the healthcare finance committee right now. That's where it got sent.
That doesn't have a chair in the House, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's what you should do. You should keep advocating. There are a number of groups. There's a coalition that was put together, who has been in my office, who I've worked with, and I'm sure Frank has been working with. The bill that came out of the committee was a combination of all the bills that were filed. They tried to do some of the best things that came from a lot of the bills. It is a complicated issue, but I think the bill that came out of committee, and I'm not gonna tell you I read every word of it, but it at least gets us a step in the direction of having GMO labeling.
We have to keep moving just to end on time, so.
okay, gas lines, we have a bill that passed the House. The Senate, I don't know why, they eased up on it a lot, so there's a problem right now. I'm sure it wasn't you.
Oh, and what exactly is that bill? It's probably so bad we didn't do it.
It's a very good bill. I didn't write it, but it's a very good bill. And essentially, one of the big problem is they don't really keep track. They wait for people to tell them, people who live near there, sometimes it's too late.
Gas
Are you
leaks.
getting, tell us what it is.
The gas leaks.
Gas leaks.
We're doing it Thursday. Ha!
Good. Now we just have to see what it says.
Ours will be better.
Okay. Well, if it's better, I'll support it.
Okay, you'll
And,
support it.
and one thing they do is they charge that to the people who get the gas. So they don't, it's no cost to them. So we have to change that. If you change that, you're sure you'll get my vote. Solar, I don't know the exact numbers, but Brookline has really moved ahead. And they're a green community, and solar energy is part of that. And what I did this year, last year, I passed a bill that allowed solar to be something that people could get tax benefits out of. This year, we're trying to raise the number of solars that can get in. There's a limit because under the past laws, there can only be so many kinds of energy in certain groups. And now we're saying, no, let solar go for 2 years without any restrictions because it's working and we need it. Taxation and progressive.
Is that a setup?
No. Let me just say, I think there should be a carbon tax. We pay garbage people to take away the garbage. We should pay garbage people to take away the carbon. And that we should have a tax that does that. Health, yeah, I'm a single payer. I go to the meetings of the group in the State House, but I don't think it's going to happen for a while. And shelter funding, Mike was right. There are places that have to be used. People are in the hotels because we haven't found any money to give them and the owners the ability to live in those places. The cuts that we made during the 2008 and after that were just terrible. Every agency, we don't have enough people in our government to do what they're supposed to do.
All right, well, since the precedent of answering each one of them, I'm gonna try and be quick. So the GMOs, I too support it. The MassPerg is one of the groups that is in support of it, and Citizens for GMO Labeling, organizations such as Northeast Organization Farming Association. If you want a list, it would be good to get together with them. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if that's going to happen in this session. There are some committees that don't have chairs, and that may be like everything else. It comes in slowly, but I think that a lot of people are in support. Gas. We are doing a bill. There are some that think that the bill that had previously passed created standard methods for a gas company to assign leaks by grades. There's a question of whether that gradation could be improved. I have filed 2 amendments on the gas leak issue. One is methane is up to 35 times powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and it is the major component of natural gas. So my amendment would require the gas companies to measure the amount of methane released by each leak. Hopefully that would be important and would upgrade to a grade 2 if the leak was over a certain percentage, and go on a grade that it would be fixed. The other amendment refers to there are trees that are dying as a result of gas leaks, and it was a Brookline inventory of trees that were killed by gas leaks, that may be 300, and in Newton also we have that problem with gas leaks. So my amendment would require the companies to replace the trees and identify which of the trees were those that were being hurt by the gas leak. So we're doing this on Thursday. Solar, all my communities are really on to solar. I too don't have an idea of the percentage, but it certainly is something that people and tax advantages have been very beneficial. I've never been afraid to vote for a tax that I thought was good, but the problem is that we vote for them and then the public rolls them back and changes the vote. We had the gas tax. I was very supportive of the gas tax. It seemed like the only thing to do. We have to look at our infrastructure, we have to look at our roads. If you did a gas tax, there would be a nexus between the tax and what that money was going to be used for. It blew my mind that all of a sudden that gas tax couldn't happen because people really opposed the increase that we wanted to do. When we tried to raise the tax rate, there was a vote. The only community that I represented that voted not to roll back the gas is Brookline, the tax was Brookline. Newton and Wellesley, they tell me, oh, they want taxes, and they voted to roll back the taxes. So not only do we have a problem with our communities in the west, other parts of the state.
Can't get Newton to vote for it?
We couldn't get Newton to vote for it. So I'm just mentioning, I've never been afraid to stand up for a tax that I thought was a good tax. I've done it, and then they've changed it and rolled it back. It wasn't healthcare, I thought, on this round. It was what's going on with the computers for healthcare. I thought that was the question. I chair a committee which is called Post Audit, and we are coming out with a report on the IT program for the unemployment insurance and for the new RV computer program. Like them, similarly, we go out to big projects. We don't break it down. I think one of the problems that governments has with any IT project is they go for the whole thing. They should maybe do it in smaller parts, and maybe we wouldn't have as much trouble. I think that our healthcare is reading things differently, and I understand one of the problems was that the federal government had different requirements than we had, and so some people got kicked out of the system. I think that is improving, but that happened also on the federal level, and there's been a problem with the vendor with regard to that particular IT project. But as chair of the Post Audit, we are coming out with a report on IT projects.
That's my shelter funding.
Shelter funding. I agree with Representative Moran. I know in caucus, while I'm not on the housing committee, there are many people, particularly I know other senators who have the motels a serious problem in Bedford and in other areas. And I know the Senate President has spoken about the need to add money in the budget to try and move these people out of those. So I don't know if I know all the answers, but I do know that is on everyone's horizon.
And the last word goes to Representative Coppinger.
I will try to be quicker. The food GMO labels, I signed on to that letter urging the committee chairman to release the bill. And it's funny, as soon as I did it,
he left.
No, someone put it on Twitter that I did it, and I immediately got 25 new followers, so I wish I signed on a little earlier. I might be a little more popular than I am now. Gas lines, I agree with everybody that it's a huge problem with the gas leaks. That was one of the first things that people brought to me when I first got elected. And I have another gas situation on the West Roxbury side of my district. I have a quarry, and the quarry is planning on filling the middle of the quarry and blasting the outskirts. They have a court order that says they can do that. And at the same time, they're selling a piece of property across the street, which is a one-lane each side road, to do a federal gas meter that they're bringing federal gas lines. So we had a meeting with the federal group, I think it was Spectra Energy, myself, Senator Rush, and City Council Matt O'Malley from Boston, and we started out the meeting hammering them, saying, you're not going to get this approved over our dead body, this, that, and the other thing. And they said, we understand, but it's federal, there's nothing you can do. So we're trying to see if they can reroute it away from a quarry, because we don't want blasting and new gas lines coming in at the same time. Solar, I don't know what the number is either. I know that it is increasing. In my other life, I also do mortgages, and I have a lot of customers who have solar, and they tell me about how not only are they saving money, but they're actually making money because they're getting a check at the end of the month. Somebody was telling me today that there was a gentleman either from Sweden or Denmark that I guess in that country, the people that do the roofing, plumbers, this guy was a plumber with a high school diploma, who has invented solar panels that look like shingles. He can do any color, make it look like your house. They come in squares like that, similar to shingles. It comes a little bit off of the roof so air can get under it, so he can use the air to actually not only electric, but to heat and to AC your house as well. And there is a gentleman in Newton who's originally, I think, from Hong Kong, who actually just is in the process of trying to purchase the company, and they're trying to do it here. He said they have to do the first 6 or 7 houses for free to demonstrate it, so I volunteered my service. I'm good like that. Health Connector, the funny thing is when this was brought up at the Women's Democratic meeting a couple weeks ago, Jeff Sanchez made a very good point. The state Health Connector worked great. Never heard a problem of the state website until we had to integrate with the federal. And therein lies the problem. Shelter funding, the underlying issue of the shelter funding too, that I know, talking with the chairman of the Ways and Means, that they really want to look at, not only is the shelter piece, but it's the transportation. You're taking kids who go to school in Boston and they could be living in Danvers, and who's paying for that? So that's something that the chairman of Ways and Means and the Speaker of the House definitely wants to take a look at and try to consolidate and make it everything a little more efficient that way. And Rep. Moran hit that perfectly on the head. And then in my final note, just when I first got elected, 2 pieces of advice that was given to me was, I think it was Rep. Moran said, whatever Brookline wants, ask Frank Smize, I can just follow his lead. I've been doing that. We work great as a delegation. And then the other thing somebody said is just take care of your constituents first, the State House second. So I meet everybody at Brugger's on VFW. On
Do they have
Brookline,
plastic bags?
West Roxbury line. They do. It's Boston. They do.
Well,
if you need me to
thank
smuggle you some freezer bags.
You all will join me in thanking our